The Magicians Podcast, brought to you in association with the Magic Circle.
Last Monday, Will Houstoun won the Magic Circle Close-Up Magician of the Year, and today he's in my hot seat. Welcome to the Magicians Podcast. Hello everybody, I'm Richard Young. Thanks for pressing the download button. I really appreciate it. If you don't follow us on Twitter, please do it now. We are at Magician Podcast, no S on the Magician. If you're on Facebook, please give our page on there a like. Just search for the Magicians Podcast. If you have a couple of spare minutes, a little review of our podcast here on iTunes would be greatly appreciated. You can do that if you have an iTunes account. Last Monday at the Magic Circle headquarters, it was one of the busiest nights on the social calendar because the final of the Close-Up Magician of the Year took place. 7 finalists took part and Will Houstoun came out the victor. I was absolutely delighted when he agreed to sit down with me to record a podcast, and I know you're going to enjoy this one because Will's a really interesting, unique magician. As well as being one of the best sleight of hand magicians you will ever see, he's also really interested in magic history, and for someone like myself who really should probably know a little bit more about magic history than I do, I tend to find Will has a really great way of articulating why it's so fascinating and why we should all spend a little bit more time looking into it. Here he is then, the Magic Circle 2015 Close-Up Magician of the Year, Will Houstoun. The 2015 Magic Circle Close-Up Magician of the Year, Will Houstoun, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
You're very calm, but you must be thrilled, right?
I am.
You are.
The corners of my mouth have raised slightly, so yes.
And you've got a good beard at the moment as well, so we can see that as well. But have you entered the close-up competition here before, or was that?
I did it once before, I think in 2007, and I had a very competition-y act, which means that I was doing 8 minutes of card and coin tricks, but needed 20 kilograms worth of table to do it. And after quite a lot of effort, I got beaten by James Brown, wearing a pair of cargo trousers and putting coins on people's shoulders very, very well indeed. He put them on people's shoulders very well, but I did it once and came second.
Good stuff. So it's been quite an amazing... Is it an amazing week for you, or an amazing day?
It was a pretty solid day.
Yeah, you've had your PhD has gone through, and you're now Dr.
Yes.
Houstoun as well. How's that feel?
Dr. Will, no less.
Yeah,
very good.
Are you going to use the title?
Yes, if I think it's going to give me an advantage.
Of course it will.
So probably when I'm booking flights and hotels, I will.
Yeah.
I might not make everybody call me Dr. Will in day-to-day life.
Great stuff. How long have you been working on the competition act which you did?
About 3 months or so in terms of a specific sort of working on those tricks and putting them together in that way, which isn't particularly long, but they're all tricks that I've been doing for quite a while beforehand.
Yeah.
The goal with it really was I knew my PhD was finishing around Christmas time in terms of when I didn't have to work on it anymore, and I thought that afterwards I'd probably get the same thing you get after a show where you're going, I've been busy doing this for the last 3 weeks, now it's wonderful because I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And then you realise that you've got no idea quite what to do and you sort of slump into a depression for a little while. So I thought if I knew that I'd signed up for the competition, that would give me something that I could go, I know what I'll do.
Yeah. I
can work on these things and make them better. And it gave me something to fill the time. As it turns out, I planned my time very badly because they both finished on the same day rather than the PhD finishing long before the competition.
Can you tell us a little bit, obviously not everyone is going to have seen the act tonight because I know I have some people listening who are not members of the Magic Circle and weren't here. Can you tell us a little bit about the act that you did tonight?
So I started off by doing Freak, which is a sort of geek magic bendy finger type trick. If you've seen Dynamo bending his finger, that's the trick. He probably does it better than me, but I started with something like that. And then I did some coin stuff, so making coins appear and disappear and turning into a big coin because it's a competition and everyone needs a big coin if they're doing a competition. And then I finished with a trick that I really, really like with 2 decks of cards, where one pack is shuffled really rather thoroughly by someone from the audience, and then after a little bit of byplay, or what would be called a bit of business I suppose in an old book, it's revealed that the deck that they shuffled and the other deck are in exactly the same order right the way through. So a sort of coincidence matched deck.
This was
trick.
the one that floored people, wasn't it? That one?
I think a few people were surprised, yes.
Yeah, that's what I've heard anyway. Lots of magicians have been absolutely floored by this bit at the end. I want to talk a bit about your background actually, because I think it's really interesting. Been looking into sort of you're a very academic person, but also I know you had a mentor, Claude Perry.
I did, yes.
But this was lovely because it was done with writing letters for a little while. Is that right?
Yeah, so Claude was a friend of my grandfather's and a wonderful, wonderful magician. And my grandma, I think, told him that I'd had a magic kit for one Christmas and suggested that maybe he could contact me. He wrote me a letter. I wrote a letter back to him. He sent me a few magic books, the Kingfisher Book of Magic, I think was the first one, and some magic tricks. And for a number of years, the only real contact I had with the magic world at all was writing a letter to him once or twice a month and receiving a letter from him once or twice a month. And it was only after that happened for quite a long time that I think I plucked up the courage to talk to him on the telephone rather than only writing letters to him, and then eventually to meet him, and then got introduced to the world of magic with the Young Magicians Club, the Magic Circle.
Because you grew up in London, didn't you?
I did, yes.
Yeah, I know you moved away for university, but you're back. You live in London again now. What
Sounds
was
a little stalkerish, yes.
Yeah, thank you. I see. No stone unturned or website. So you joined the Young Magicians Club. Were you a regular? Were you coming, to the workshops and things, or were you more like a person who just enjoyed the stuff you got through the post with it?
No, I was close enough to the Magic Circle that I could come to the meetings when they happened. I think they were every 2 months probably at that point, and you had to pay, it might have been 50p or it might have been £1 each time you came to one, which seemed like quite a large investment at the time, but perhaps wasn't so big in retrospect. And there were some wonderful people there. Ian Thompson was the president, I think, or the chair, I can't remember which it was, and does some wonderful coin magic. He was the first person I saw do proper grown-up coin magic. There was another young magician called Ben Broomfield who had got Guy Hollingworth's book Drawing Room Deceptions and was doing a lot of stuff from that, and that made me want to get Guy's book very much.
Well, that was the first book you got, wasn't it?
It was, yes. It was the first proper book. I'd had some Kingfisher Book of Magic kind of books, and then I got Drawing Room Deceptions.
But this kind of paints the picture nicely because, you're a proper sleight of hand magician. That's a ridiculous book to start with or to begin with quite early on, isn't it? Because some of the stuff in there is quite technical, quite advanced.
A little challenging, yes.
You learned, I think the first thing you learned was the Triumph, his version of the Triumph, is that right?
Your research is wonderful, yes.
Thank you.
I learnt the Triumph, I learnt the close-up handling of waving the aces, and I learnt a version of the gambling routine that he's got. I don't think I could do any of the false deals at all, but I sort of tried to. But I remember, because I saw a guy do an excellent workshop, which he did for Laura London recently at the Hippodrome Casino, he was doing the gambling routine, and partway through he explained that there's a crimp card involved in it, and I didn't remember a crimp card being involved in it at all. And I sort of figured out how to do the routine, and I'd shown my parents, so I must have known the routine very well. And I realised eventually that it was because when I had his book, cards were quite precious and quite valuable, and
yeah.
I spent a few days thinking about whether I wanted to bend the corner of one of them or not, so that I could do this trick, and decided in retrospect, actually no, I don't want to bend the corner of a card. That's going to spoil the deck, and I don't want to do that.
He's still one of your favourite magicians, isn't he, Guy? I think
yes.
You're a big admirer. I'm interested to know, I normally ask these questions sometimes towards the end, but I really want to get a good understanding of who you are, Will. Who are some of your real magical heroes? Because the way you perform, the type of magic you learn, the fact you're so into history of magic, you're a very unique magician, really. There's not many magicians like you. So I'm interested to know who your influences are in terms of magicians you really admire.
I guess probably living ones, or recently alive ones, is the best way to go. Somebody like Noel Britton, I think, is absolutely fantastic. If you haven't listened to his podcast, you probably should. That's part of why he's fantastic. But he's incredibly good at thinking everything through. He's incredibly good at being funny, incredibly good at timing things, very good at organising things. There's lots and lots of stuff that I can get from someone like him. Richard McDougall is another person who I think's wonderful and has helped massively with sort of presentation, how to show people tricks and all that sort of side of things, rather than just technical, mechanical stuff. Guy Hollingworth was a huge influence in terms of mechanical, technical sort of stuff, how that worked. Claude Perry, who you mentioned, was a very different sort of magician. He was a children's magician mainly when I knew him, but before then had been a sort of after-dinner kind of magician when you could do 15 minutes of stand-up magic at the end of a fancy dinner. He used to do that. And he had a very wonderful, sort of gentle way of talking about things, and very nice, gentle, sort of soothing comforting, comfortable.
That's very
kind
like
of thing.
you, though, isn't it? You present in that style as well. Is that where the influence is? You're very gentle,
Possibly.
very gentlemanly, actually, when the way you present your magic. Is that the influence back from Claude? And
Possibly, yeah. It's not something that I've thought through massively in a, do I want to be David Williamson, Ricky Jay, or Claude Perry? Claude, that's the one for me. But I imagine, because I spent so long learning from him, a sort of very formative period, that will have rubbed off. And then there are people who do the history, so Ricky Jay is another obvious one, because he's someone who knows a lot about the history of magic and is very interesting when he talks about it, very interested in that, very good at presenting that to other people, and he's also pretty handy at doing card tricks. And I quite like both card tricks and history.
This is where my research is going to let me down a tiny bit, in terms of I know these things that have happened, but I'm a little bit unsure of the timeline, so perhaps you can clarify. And that is, I know obviously you went to university and you did a degree in mechanical engineering, but also around this period of time you went to work for Rodney James Piper in Spain for a couple of summers.
Yep.
At the House of Illusion. So can you tell us a little bit about where your life was at this time? Were you doing both at the same time, or?
No, I wasn't. I went to university to do mechanical engineering because it sort of seemed like a good idea at the time, and you're sort of expected, I think, here to decide what you want to do at 16, I suppose. When you finish your GCSEs, decide what A-levels you want to do, and then that influences what course you're going to do. So when I was 16 and clueless, I thought I wanted to be a mechanical engineer, and I didn't realise that I didn't until I was about 2 years into a 4-year course. So
right.
By that point you may as well finish.
Mm-hmm.
So I finished that and graduated. But during the second half of that particularly, I had got more and more into magic. A couple of local magicians, Rich Berry and Steve Macro, and another guy who's perhaps a bit more known, Mark Oberon, was good friends with all of them and worked on magic stuff with them. And after Mark had done a few magic competitions, I decided I would have a go at this magic competition thing. And I entered the local magic club's competition, did terribly.
Right.
And then I entered the international one and the Blackpool one, and then eventually FISM. And through all of that, I sort of put together 8 or so minutes of competition magic-y kind of act, where you do nice looking visual magic with cards and coins, and it's all to music, because that way you don't have to talk and you know you're not going to overrun, and then you produce big things at the end, because that's what one does.
Will Houstoun, did you have a jumbo coin?
I didn't have the biggest of jumbo coins, no. I was highly, highly original, and I had a very big Zippo lighter instead.
Oh, right, brilliant.
So after 7.5 minutes of card and coin magic, for no apparent reason whatsoever, a small Zippo lighter followed by a medium Zippo lighter followed by a very large Zippo lighter appeared in increasingly large flashes of fire.
They clapped though, didn't they? That's the thing. It did work, didn't it? They loved it.
It did, yeah. But this is something that guys talked about a little bit, which is often if you do a cups and balls routine, at the end you produce an orange, they're not clapping an amazing piece of magic, they're just clapping because they've seen an orange and they didn't expect it. Or when you make
brilliant.
a jumbo coin appear, they're not clapping because a coin magically grew till it was 7 inches in diameter before their eyes, they're clapping because they haven't seen a coin that's that big before. And I think the same thing was almost certainly true when I was pulling out big lighters. The one thing it does have though, which I think is very good, is it gives a finishing point. So for example, in the close-up competition here, I was doing some stuff where coins would disappear and reappear, and 3 coins appeared, vanished again, a little bit happened with 1 coin, then I made it simpler by just having one hand holding the 1 coin, you blow on the coin, it disappears, you give your hand a little wave and it reappears, and that's very, very nice looking, and it looks very, very pretty, and it's just one hand, it's very simple, but it's also very small. It's the kind of thing that you go, oh, that was nice, rather than going, yay, we're all going to clap. So after doing that, which is probably the end of the trick in terms of a magical point of view, you then produce a jumbo coin, not because it's particularly good magic, but because it's an exclamation point or a full stop at the end of a paragraph, and everyone goes, oh, that must have been the end, now we'll clap.
That's our applause
So I think the big
cue.
coin just serves as an applause cue, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not confident enough to stand with my arms outstretched, so instead I take something big out of my pocket and wave it at people.
That's brilliant. And sorry, we were talking about the timeline of events and you getting towards working with Rodney.
Rodney, yes. So I did this competition stuff, and I think I met Rodney sometime whilst I was doing it, and he explained that he has a wonderful magic theatre with state-of-the-art lighting and sound and all of that sort of tech stuff in Salou, and would I like to go and work there? And I said yes, and when I finished university I went there just for 3 months. I didn't go for the full sort of summer season that starts in Easter and finishes around Halloween. I went for sort of the busy bit in the middle, I suppose, and it was great because I was able to do my 8.5 minutes of magic that was designed for a magic competition with a screen and a projector and so on, but for 100 to 150 lay people every night who'd wanted to come and see a magic show, and 2 shows a night, in fact.
Yeah.
So it was wonderful. I sort of got experience doing competition-style magic for regular people, and it was quite nice in some ways because a lot of people say a competition act doesn't really have any relevance in the real world, and effectively I did exactly the same thing I did in the competitions in the real world, and it all panned out rather well, just with slightly different pauses, a little bit of difference in the timing and so on, but it did kind of work.
So that was your foundation as a performer, though, that doing it every night and being able to tweak it. Is that really, would you say that's why your stuff got so good? Is it fair to say that, because you were doing it so often?
Not sure it got so good. It certainly got better by doing that. There were 2 things really. One thing was going there and doing it 2 shows a night every night and going, if it's gone wrong, it doesn't matter because there's another one later or there's another one tomorrow and I can just always try again then. The other thing that made a massive difference was lecturing for other magicians, because up until that point I hadn't stood in front of a room full of people and talked. I'd only stood and had someone press play and then sort of moved my hands roughly in time with the music that was playing. So after I did the international competition, Noel Britton asked if I'd like to do a lecture at the convention on the Friday night when they have the sort of, it's someone who's alright, but it doesn't really matter too much because most people are coming for the Saturday. He put me into that slot, which was probably for the best.
Well, Darren Brown was once in that slot, I remember. Many, many years ago, Darren lectured there on a Friday night, so it's still a pretty good place to be.
It is a very good place to be, and you have a perfect example of one person who's done very well from it and one person who's gone in the opposite direction. But I did that, and that was great, but it was the first time I'd stood on a stage, it was the first time I'd really been plugged into a microphone, it was the first time I tried to talk to an audience and so on. And in fact, Marco, who edits all of the DVDs of the international stuff, edited the lecture DVD, and the lecture DVD looks great, but after he gave me a copy, he asked if I noticed anything funny about it. I hadn't particularly. And then he said, well, the funny thing about it is there are no close-ups for the first 10 minutes. I'm going, alright, is this just the way you do them? What is this? And he goes, no, your hands were shaking too much.
Wow.
Any close-up, your hands just sort of jiggling off screen and back onto screen again. And it was, I'd never stood on a stage in front of a big audience and tried to talk to people before.
Yeah.
So doing lectures gave me confidence doing that.
And so you went off and did a lecture tour in America, I think, as well, didn't you? Was this around the same sort of time? Following that? What was that like going? With the American magicians, they liked your magic, didn't they? Because you...
They liked me because I had an English accent.
But also, had the book already come out at this point? Because I know the... No, so this is before the book. Okay.
Yeah, no, at this point I was doing a lecture which was basically difficult card and coin tricks that no one wanted to learn anyway, which wasn't the best structure for a lecture in retrospect, but was quite fun to do. And I went to America and lectured, and it was absolutely terrifying. It was one of those sort of slightly foolish, I'm going to go and travel somewhere but don't really know what I'm getting into things. I think I did the first lecture, and I chipped ahead DVDs and all that sort of stuff going, well, this is how you're meant to do it. And the first lecture I did, I made almost no sales whatsoever, and I had 2 months worth of lectures booked, and wow. I now had a suitcase full of DVDs and more DVDs waiting for me at the next place. I just had visions of carting around giant bags full of DVDs and being very poor for the next 2 months, although in the end it all worked out. But it was great, it was good fun travelling around, seeing people, meeting people.
So what point do you start writing this book? You wrote a book called, your first book was called The Notebook.
It was, yes. I think there's a film that stole my title.
Yeah,
but
that came later.
Probably. I think the film might have been first. I didn't Google the title before I named it. That's a mistake I will not make again. So I wrote a book called The Notebook. So I had been doing the work for Rodney in Spain, and I was doing the lectures in America, and I had decided that I quite liked the history of magic at this point, and I was going to read all of the old books that are in the Magic Circle's library. If you go to the Magic Circle library, there's lots of good books, about 10,000 of them, sort of split between reference and lending sections, but behind the desk where the librarians sit there's also a glass-fronted bookcase, and they've got all the sort of rare antiquarian or signed books in there. And I decided that I was going to try and read all of the antiquarian books, and I was going to try and find all of the non-politically correct tricks in them, because they were very funny, and then I would write something about non-politically correct tricks in old books. Which wasn't a great idea, but in the course of trying to read all these books I bumped into a handwritten manuscript, and it was anonymously written. We've still got no idea who wrote it. It wasn't dated, although some other performers were mentioned in it, but it described 81 and a half really good card tricks. 81 and a half because it runs out partway through the last one. So there may be more of this book floating around somewhere. That may have been the end of it.
What you mean, like literally the back of the book is missing? Is that what you mean? Wow, okay.
Yes, it finishes on a page that's quite badly water damaged. The ink's all smudged, and the book is a manuscript that's then been rebound in a modern binding.
Oh, I see.
So you've got no idea what happened to the other pages or anything. But it describes some pretty good card tricks, and some of the people who are mentioned in it give you an idea of when it might have been written. So you're seeing people like Bresslaw, and you're seeing books like William Hooper's Rational Recreations or Thomas Denton's Conjure Unmasked, and you're going, okay, so I know roughly when this might be based on that stuff. And based on all of that, it seemed like it had been written earlier than you'd expect for the quality of the tricks it's describing. So I thought it seemed worthy of a bit more research. Justin Hyam, who's a wonderful card magician, helped me quite a lot with that, and Peter Lane and Eddie Dawes as well. Both of the Magic Circle helped a lot. And a little bit more research turned into about a year's research. And at the end of it, I was able to figure out, based on the people he talked about seeing and the books that he probably had read and an average life expectancy for somebody during that period, that the book was probably written sometime between 1792 and 1806. And then that becomes quite interesting because he's describing things like what we know as the Hofzinser under spread force, but he's describing it before Hofzinser existed, so clearly this move goes back a little bit earlier. He's describing things like a psychological think of a card trick, where you show someone a spread of cards and say, think of any card, and then you carry on with it, which we would say is sort of very Vernonian approach, but clearly was being done a long time earlier. He describes some quite advanced double lift handling, which had been described earlier in Richard Neve's book, The Merry Companion, but isn't particularly prevalent as a move until quite a lot later. And so a lot of the material is quite interesting when you know how old it was. And I think what this is I think the notebook is somebody who's written down the magic that they liked, the magic that they did, and the magic that they saw. And so this is a magician's description of the magic he was seeing and the magic he was doing. Whereas all of the books that we have available from the time are books that magicians wrote to sell to the public at the end of their shows, or that booksellers wrote for the public. So looking back at that period and using something like Breslau's Last Legacy as a way of judging the quality of the magic of the time, I suppose would be a bit like looking at today and using, I don't know, the Big Book of Magic or something like that as a way of judging all of the magic that's being done today. And this notebook just gives you a little insight into what was going on within a magician's world, rather than a layperson's view of it.
I find this extraordinary, Will, because just what you've said there, that you go into the museum and you go and get the books from behind the counter. I mean, there's not many magicians I know who do that type of thing. You're a proper researcher, you're really interested in history, and this is something I wanted to ask you about, and that is that, does it bother you that there are a lot of professional magicians and a lot of members of this club here who are not really bothered about magic history? Does that bother you, or do you just kind of go, well, that's your advantage because you are prepared to do what you've done there, which is sit down there and read the old books behind the counter? Do you kind of understand what I'm getting at?
Yes. I see what you mean. I don't think it particularly bothers me. The one time it does bother me is when people release things as new or start talking about new ideas or that sort of thing, and you're going, well, you know, there's a guy who died 100 years ago who was doing it 50 years before that, and probably doing a better version, frankly, than you're doing. And that's always a little bit sad that people don't know that's out there. But it's, I think, more somebody who doesn't use any of this stuff, it's more their loss than a problem for me that they're not doing it.
Yeah.
Because if you think about the history of magic, you've got books going back, let's just say, to Scott's discovery of witchcraft in the 16th century, and you can easily access books going back to that period using Google Books or something like that, which means you've got about 500 years worth of magicians writing down what tricks they were doing and how they worked and whether they worked and why they worked and what was good for them and what wasn't so good for them. And so rather than saying, I've got an idea for a trick, I'm going to try and figure out everything about it, you can look at 500 years worth of other people trying to do similar things, see what didn't work for them, go, alright, I'm not going to use any of the stuff that worked terribly for the last 500 years, and start with 500 years worth of work already done for you.
Yeah. Which
seems like a much stronger place to be than just going, I'm going to try and come at this fresh and make the whole thing up myself.
Where does your love of magic history come from? What was the first thing that kind of made you go, actually I'm really interested in that really, really old stuff? Can you remember?
I think the notebook was the first thing. because that was the first time I'd come across magic in a technical card sleight of handy way, which is what I was very much interested in, and seen that it went back further than I expected, and found out that it was really good, back much further than I expected. And then once you've sort of seen the possibility for good stuff going way back, that's better than you could have dreamed of, it's very hard not to want to try and find more things that are very good that you didn't expect. And it's quite a buzz just doing the research and trying to find out about the people who are doing it and how it worked, why it worked, and so on. And there's one of the things I did last time I went to the Magic Castle was to do one of the tricks from the notebook. And so I'm doing a trick that was probably last performed, at least in that version, either in the very late 18th century or very early 19th century. But either way, it's a good 200 years old. And so it was being done to people in London who didn't have electric lighting, who had never seen a photograph because photographs hadn't been invented, who certainly didn't have things like the internet and mobile phones and television and radio and all of those things. And they saw this card trick and thought it was very, very good. And despite the fact that 200 years later we do have electric lights and the internet and telephones and all of these other things, a card trick that amazed people 200 years ago is still amazing to people today.
Yeah.
And it's quite wonderful to see that there's nothing that's really changing that. Something that's astonishing is astonishing.
Yeah.
And even that vast change in cultural context and historical context doesn't matter too much.
Yeah, still relevant. Absolutely brilliant. We're just going to take a quick commercial break, Will Houstoun. We'll be back with you in a second.
Whether you're new to magic or a seasoned professional, Alakazam Magic are here to help. Alakazam have been supplying magic to magicians for well over 20 years. Not only do we carry all the latest and greatest magic tricks, books and DVDs, but we also manufacture one of the finest ranges of magic tricks in the world. The Alakazam name is synonymous with great customer service, educated advice and honesty. So if you're shopping for new magic, make sure you check out our website www.alakazam.co.uk or pay a visit to our fully stocked shop.
Gigi-O, free for 30 days. Be a pro, get Gigi-O.
Yes! Gigi-O, ladies and gentlemen, is now being enjoyed by hundreds of magicians all around the world. Not just magicians, other entertainers are jumping on board too, including singers and caricaturists. It's a web-based software, so you don't need to download anything. It keeps all of your bookings in one place. It generates PDF contracts and invoices and automatically updates your diary on your phone or tablet so that you don't have to enter everything manually. A free 30-day trial awaits at gigio.co.uk. That's Gigio, spelled GIGGIO.co.uk.
The Magicians Podcast, brought to you in association with the Magic Circle, the world's premier magical society. Are you ready to join the world's most exclusive magic club? Visit themagiccircle.co.uk to find out more.
There we go, 3 great sponsors there. Alakazam Magic, the Magic Circle, and of course Gigi-O. And you don't really do gigs, so I imagine you don't really use Gigi-O, is that?
I don't particularly, no.
Right.
No, I do use the Magic Circle on occasion, though.
You do use the Magic Circle on occasion, so, there you go. Will Houstoun uses one of our 3 sponsors. Great.
Sorry to the other 2.
That's right. You wrote a second book as well, which was, I have the title here, sorry, let me just... Hellas in Wonderland.
Hellas in Wonderland.
Hellas in Wonderland. Can you tell us a bit about the difference between the first book and the second book?
Yes, so this was Peter Lane, who's the head librarian at the Magic Circle, being very, very smart. After I finished writing the notebook, he gave me, I would say, a week to be a bit smug about it and a bit sort of pleased with myself. And then he gave me a week or so to be just sort of not there and not doing anything. And then he gave me another week or so when I had the books printed out, and I go, oh, look at this, it's an actual book, like a real book, rather than just an imaginary book in my head or on my computer. And then after that, he came up to me one day in the Circle Library with a plastic carrier bag and said, you might be interested in what's in here. And I made a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake. I looked in the bag, and another year of my life disappeared researching another handwritten manuscript. Right. That also turned out to be much more interesting than you might expect. It was much easier than the first one, because I know it was written by Professor Robert Hellis, because he wrote his name on the front page of it.
That's a big help there from the first one, isn't it?
It was a good clue, absolutely. And he also wrote the date that it was written in the front as well.
Right.
So that also made life considerably easier. And it was a book that was written based on lessons that he was giving to students who'd said they were interested in magic in sort of the 1860s and 1870s or thereabouts. And it described the magic he was teaching them. So he would give you a course of 12 lessons, let's say, and then at the end of the 12 lessons he'd present you with a little notebook where he'd written down each of the tricks he taught you and how they were done and so on. And then if you wanted to, as an enthusiastic student, you could of course carry on filling it in with new stuff that you were learning and so on and so forth. So this notebook that's in the Peter Lane collection that he let me use and write about describes the magic that Hellis taught an unknown student, then more of the magic but now written down by the student, and then in the back he's copied in some scripts for a ventriloquist's performance that he rather liked, and some price lists from various magic dealers who I suppose he was thinking about spending his hard-earned money with. And again, it gives you an insight into what magic people were learning at the time. And Hellis is a particularly interesting person if you're interested in this period, because he owned a magic shop. He was very successful. He sold photographic equipment and sold photographs to people for a living, but he also ran a magic shop. The magic shop is one that Professor Hoffman visited, who wrote some seminal books about magic, and he took lessons from Hellis. Hellis was also friends with the magician Charlier of Charlier Pass fame, and we know very little about Charlier, but quite a lot of it is known through Hellis. Even more of it's known through Hoffman, and I think Hellis is probably the person who introduced Hoffman to Charlier. And so he seems to have been sort of right in the middle of that world of magic at the time.
Yeah.
So both books pretty much have the same format. The notebook is the original text of the book on one page, just copied, so in the original handwriting, and then on the facing page I've transcribed it. So you don't have to deal with the guy's handwriting if you don't want to. You can read it in a modern format, and then it's annotated as well.
Yeah.
Then at the end I've added appendices talking about when I think the book was written, who all the different people who are mentioned in it are, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Hellis in Wonderland, I've done pretty much the same thing. I know who he is, obviously, but nothing's been written about him really, so I did a big sort of biographical piece about him at the back.
Yeah.
I wrote about who all the other magicians you might see named are as well, so that you know a little bit about who they are and how they fit into everything. There were some colour images in the book, so I reproduced some of those in colour so you can see them nicely. And again, the body of the text is the original handwritten manuscript on one page, a transcription on the facing page, and then annotations as well, just to make it easier to cross-reference or to tie into modern versions of the tricks.
Sure. You worked on a very unique project, which was you worked on with Martin Scorsese on a film called Hugo. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did on that film? And I know Paul Keeve was involved as well.
Paul Keeve was involved as well, absolutely. So the people from Hugo wanted somebody who could tell them about card tricks from the 19th century. And as it happened, this was just after I had written The Notebook, which is all about card tricks, and I had also written Hellis in Wonderland, which is all about 19th century magic. So that sort of fitted rather well. So I spoke with them a little bit, and they said that they were making a film and they needed some 19th century magic tricks in it, and would I be able to come and meet them? And I knew absolutely nothing about the film at this point. And again, common trend through the interview, I didn't have the sense to Google Hugo in the same way I didn't have the sense to Google The Notebook before I chose that title. So they said they would send a car to pick me up, which seemed very good. So worst comes to the worst, it'll be a little student film, I won't get paid, I won't be able to help particularly, but you know, they're going to send a taxi, what's the harm in going and seeing them for an hour or two? A very nice man wearing a three-piece suit knocked on the door and then gave me a lift in a Rolls to Shepperton Studio.
Very nice.
And I thought that maybe it was actually not a student film after all. Then I had a lot of work in America doing some lectures that I didn't want to not do, and Paul Keeve was also involved in the project. And so in the end, Paul Keeve wound up sort of running the magic side of it, and I helped whilst he was busy, and then I had done stuff. He was doing stuff whilst I was busy, and sort of between us it all got done. But Paul made a lot of the important decisions.
I know more recently as well you've been working on a TV show called Wolf Hall, is it?
Wolf Hall, yes.
Which has been very well received. Can you tell us a bit about what you were doing on that project?
Yes, so Wolf Hall is a TV series. I think it's on BBC Two at the moment, and it's based on some Booker Prize winning novels by a lady called Hilary Mantel, which were very, very good. Wolf Hall and Bringing Up the Bodies, I think, were the names. And in them, they follow Thomas Cromwell, during the reign of Henry VIII, and they Wolsey, and then later his relationship with Henry VIII as arguably the first person who's sort of formed a political career not through noble birth or ancestry, but just through his own ability. Now, in these, there's a scene very early on in the books where Cromwell's depth is hinted at. The idea is he's this mysterious person, he's been to Italy, he's fought in wars as a mercenary, he's been an accountant, he's learned a mysterious memorization system in Italy as well. He's done all these strange things, and they're all hinted at, so you know he's got this interesting backstory, but you never really know what it was. And one of the things he's hinted at having done is managed to pay his way out of England when he first travelled to Europe by doing the 3-card Monty on the streets of a port town in the south of England, which meant that the actor Mark Rylance, who is playing Thomas Cromwell, has to be able to do the 3-card Monty. So I spent a few very pleasant afternoons with him, showing him how to do a 3-card Monty routine, and then went along on set for the day to sort of make sure that it was all being done right and so on. The really cool thing about this was we wanted to have reasonably authentic looking cards for the film, and it's quite hard to find 16th century cards, and the ones that are around are pretty knackered, so you can't really use them. And the reproductions that were available were also fairly terrible, but because it's a fairly big budget drama series, they were able to send somebody to the V&A who looked at examples of old playing cards, amalgamated those into a design for an old playing card, a sort of typical old playing card. Then she hand screen printed the cards and then hand cut the cards. So we were able to use a deck of cards that had literally been printed and cut individually one by one.
That's amazing.
And then made for doing it, which was a really cool thing to do.
5 years ago this month, you were on the cover of the Magic Circular magazine, and now you're the editor of the Magic Circular magazine. I'm very interested to know, first of all, there aren't many people who could do the job, let's be honest. I'm interested to know why you do it, first of all.
Full points for the smoothest introduction to something ever.
Thank you very much.
That was the serial killer stalking thing finally paying off. Why do I do it? I do it because I like writing about magic. I find that very interesting. I like the Magic Circle very much. I've had a lot of good stuff from the Circle. And I get to meet a lot of interesting people and do a lot of interesting stuff by doing it. So there are a lot of people who've been on the cover of the magazine. Your good self.
I've been on there once.
Indeed.
I was a bit annoyed though, I wasn't by myself on it. So
no, but once you get rid of that other fella, maybe you can come back.
Maybe.
But yeah, I get to talk with lots of interesting people about stuff that I wouldn't get to talk to about otherwise, and it's just good fun to put together. And it's something that's been going for 100 and something years, and I can go, well, I'm studying Hoffman for my PhD, and Hoffman's friends with Devant and Maskelyne, and Devant and Maskelyne are both involved in editing the early issues of the magazine.
That's lovely, yeah.
So
how much of your time does it take up?
on.
Because I mean, it's immaculate. I look at it every month. It either drops on my doormat or I log into the website and see that it's been uploaded onto the website. How much of your time is it taking up every month?
If it's immaculate, and probably some mistakes do slip through, but when it looks good, a lot of that is thanks to all the people who proofread for me and make sure that all of the mistakes that I've made don't get through, and also all the people who write stuff for it often, who write to an incredibly high standard and give me very, very good content to start with. So a huge amount of that is thanks to people giving me the material and the people making sure the material comes out right, and the designer John Hawkins who makes it all look really good. So that's not all me by any stretch of the imagination. But I would say it probably takes a week and a half to 2 weeks of a month in terms of putting each issue together, and then there are sort of bits of admin in terms of replying to emails and so on in the meantime as well, just to keep everything ticking over.
Do you have in your head a kind of period of time you're going to do it for? Because there's been some amazing editors that have come and gone. Anthony Owen did it for a while and things like that.
He did.
Or is it just something ongoing until you don't enjoy the process anymore? Or is that your thought process?
I think it's probably something ongoing until I don't enjoy it anymore, and until I think I've run out of favours. Because there's a thing, Noel Britton organised with other people the summer programmes at the Magic Circle at one point, and I helped with a few of the later ones. And one of the things we talked about is when you're organising something like that, you're kind of calling in favours from all the people you know, and getting them to give you stuff and whatever it is. And after a little while, you've run out.
Yeah.
You don't know any more interesting people, you're finished. And I think there'll come a point with the magazine where all the interesting people I know, or the people who might do something for me, have done something for me. And that's a great time for somebody new to step in.
Yeah.
I did think about doing 52 issues just because it seems like quite a round, complete number to do.
Idea.
and then I decided that was probably a bit too pretentious.
I see. As I say, it was 5 years ago this month, you were on the cover, Matt Field interviewed you. There's a question Matt asked you in that interview, and 5 years on, I want to ask you the question again, if that's all right, because I think it was a really interesting question. He asked you if you thought it was a good time for magic. So 5 years ago, yeah, you can look it up if you're a member of the Magic Circle. If you're not, you should join. And all the back issues of the Magic Circle are on the website. Here we are, 2015. Do you think now is a good time for magic?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's a great time for magic. There's great magic on TV. Certainly in the UK. I don't know so much about America, but it certainly sounds good in America. Dynamo's doing his live tour, which a lot of people get very down on, but if you haven't already seen it, look up his launch of, I think it was a Fiat car, where he did a live stage illusion.
Yeah.
It's one of the best live stage illusion kind of things you could see, I think. So that's going to be a massive, massive boost for magic. And then in terms of my interests, there's great sleight of hand stuff around, there's more and more of it around, there's more and more people doing it, and there's easier and easier access to larger and larger amounts of interesting historical stuff that you can find as well. So yes, I think it's a good time for magic.
Great stuff. So you finish your degree and you move back to London, and then that's when you start doing your PhD, right?
Well, I had a gap year originally, which was going to be working for Rodney and then doing a bit of American tour stuff. And I can't remember quite how many, but I think it stretched into 3 or 4 gap years. Because I finished both books during that period. Did a few other bits and pieces, and then after that I thought it would be interesting to do something on Hoffman. I'd found a few interesting bits. Somebody said you should do it academically. Now, I'd already done a mechanical engineering degree, so I knew that academic stuff can neither be fun nor interesting. So I told them that you can't do this academically. This is fun. This is not academic. But they were convincing enough in arguing that actually maybe you can do something that's fun and interesting academically. So I found a supervisor who's a wonderful lady called Marina Warner, and I told her that I wanted to do a PhD based on this kind of stuff. She invited me to come round to her house. She very sweetly, on the first time I met her, apologised for not having sherry, but did have tea and coffee and cake for us to eat whilst we discussed the possibility of doing a PhD. And she was incredibly enthusiastic and helpful. I think on the first meeting I mentioned that Hoffman's real name's Angelo Lewis, and she said, "Oh, Angelo, that sounds Italian. Do you know if he's Italian?" I didn't know either way. She said, "Well, because there was an influx of Italian immigrants to London a little bit earlier on, and perhaps he or his parents came from Italy at that point." I'd never even considered that as an idea, and within an hour of meeting her, she'd suggested 4 or 5 things.
That's fantastic.
That I went, this is something that I wish I'd known or thought of.
Yeah.
How could it not have happened? And she's also someone who's very interesting in terms of the breadth of her knowledge. So a lot of people, I think, when you first meet them, they seem like they know everything. And then after a little while you find out, oh, actually they didn't know anything about this thing, and they didn't know anything about this thing. And you can sort of plot out a map of their expertise, and you know what things they're really good at, what things they know about, and what things that fall outside that. And there are a few people I've met, I don't know, half a dozen maybe, probably less, who I haven't found any of those edges yet. And Marina, my supervisor, is one of those people. And there hasn't yet been something that I've talked about with her, even when I've tried quite hard to talk about something that seems obscure or very off the track of what we normally talk about, where she hasn't been able to tell me and already known stuff that's interesting that I would have liked to know. So she's a fantastic person just because I don't know where the end of her knowledge is yet. It's just sort of this vast expanse that doesn't seem to have corners or edges, and that's quite exciting.
I saw a fantastic quote recently which was, everybody you meet knows something you don't know. I thought that was very good actually, because magicians in particular sometimes not very good at listening to other people. They just like talking about themselves, don't they? But if you
Enough about you.
if you do consider the possibility that every single person you meet knows something you don't, then yeah, I think we'll all learn a little bit more. So your PhD thesis was called Professor Hoffman's Modern Magic: The Rise of Victorian Conjuring, which sounds like a Morgan and West show. But can you tell
Mine's real Victorian magic.
Can you tell us a little bit about what actually the content of the thesis is?
So a very, very short version, because otherwise 60,000 words will take a long, long time, is that Professor Hoffman comes along at a very interesting point in magic's history, because you have magic as an increasingly respectable thing to go and see. You've got more and more prominent and well-known magicians. You have a rise in the world of children's literature, People like Lewis Carroll have written very popular books for kids. That didn't happen too much earlier, so the idea of writing for children's popular. Children's magazines are very, very popular. And all of that sets a stage for somebody to write a good book about how to do magic for children that will be widely accessible. The thing that I think is really interesting about what Hoffman did is some of the stuff before had said you should learn about magic tricks, and you should learn about them because of the principles they explain. Not because you're going to do magic tricks, but because you should know about chemistry, and we'll tell you about a chemical trick because that's more interesting to see.
Yeah.
Hoffman said it's not just about telling you that a trick exists and this is how it's done, but there's a benefit to actually learning how to do the tricks yourself. And it's not that you should become a professional conjurer, but it's that if you're a young man at the time, probably, you can learn magic tricks, and that will teach you about how to talk to people, it'll teach you about how to present, it will teach you about how to handle and manipulate things, it'll teach you about how to spot deception and to deceive people, and all of these are useful skills for the career you'll have in the future as a professional, helping to service the needs of the British Empire. So he was writing about magic sort of as an educational contrivance, I suppose, not because you should become a magician, but because learning to be a magician was something that would be very useful in helping you to become whatever it was you became later.
So I was going to ask you this, because you're like a proper... I see you as a proper magician. Like, I really do. Like, you know about history, you come up with stuff yourself, you're incredibly good with sleight of hand. And I want to ask this question, Will Houstoun. What drives you mental when you watch close-up magic and close-up magicians? Are there things, traits, or certain tricks that you see that just drive you a bit mental?
I think mediocre magic is the most irritating thing in the world. If you see a fantastic magician, that's absolutely wonderful. And if you see a terrible magician, that's absolutely wonderful in a completely different way. But when you see a mediocre magician, it's not bad enough that you go, well, I know precisely what I'm going to try not to do. You don't go, that was wonderful, I'm going to try and be more like that. You're just left with sort of a greyness where you're going, there was nothing for me.
That's interesting.
I haven't learned something that's bad that I want to avoid, I haven't learned something good that I want to do. I'm just sort of stuck in a wasteland.
I know in your spare time you work on a very interesting project which is called Breathe, and it's a form of therapy magic, a little bit similar to what David Copperfield's done with Project Magic. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is you do with it and why you got involved?
Sure. I trust you to get Copperfield back into things.
Thank you. No
but
problem.
It is very like Copperfield's Project Magic, but this was started by a magician called David Owen, who's a member of the Magic Circle, and he wanted to do something with magic but didn't want to do gigs. So he was quite comfortable in a hospital environment and thought maybe there was something to be done using magic in a hospital environment. He then looked around a lot of different hospitals, eventually found some people who were willing to talk to him, and from that, several years later, Breathe Magic emerged. And Breathe Magic is a way of using specially designed magic tricks as a form of physical or mental therapy for children with physical or mental handicaps. So the largest part of the work we do is for children with hemiplegia, which is a condition that affects one side of the body and limits movement. So it's a little bit like if you think of someone who's had a stroke and they can't really control their grasp and the movement of their hand properly. If you're a child who has this condition, you're told to practice exercises like stacking up coins and then unstacking them. And no child in their right mind will do that for 10 minutes every evening after school. But we can find a magic trick, like the cups and balls, that involves a very precise stacking and unstacking action, but is actually a magic trick. And if you show a kid a magic trick and say, I'm going to teach you this, you've got to practice it, they'll go away and practice. And we get kids who've come in for their first day of Breathe who are sick of their therapy, they don't want to be nagged by their parents don't want to nag them anymore, who will learn a magic trick, and the parents will come in the next day and say, last night Jack spent 2 hours practicing and we had to confiscate his magic kit so he'd stop. So they're practicing a magic trick that they really want to learn. In the process, they're practicing all of these physical actions that have been very, very carefully coordinated with occupational therapists and researchers to make sure they're the right things. And so they're practicing all these actions. And there's an extra benefit. If you're a child who can't use one of their hands properly, you're almost certainly the last person to get picked for any sports team. You're the last person to finish their homework. You're the person who can't do their shoelaces and get out as quickly as everyone else. You're always the person who's a little bit behind everyone else. But if you come back to school after doing magic for 2 weeks, you're now the person who can do amazing things that none of your classmates can do that they all really want to, and that gives a huge confidence boost. So it works very well as a physical form of therapy, but also in a psychosocial way. It's incredibly beneficial.
Over the last couple of months, I've had a few magician friends of mine who have said that they're a little bit embarrassed about how little they know about magic history. One of them, I will be honest, is Strange, my double act partner. He said it to me when we were here during the Christmas show. He said, you know, I should really know a little bit more about magic history than I do. I wonder if you have an interesting answer to this. For magicians who are out there working magicians and they like all sorts of magic, where's a good place to start, Will? Like, if you were going to start looking into magic history, have you got any thoughts on that?
I suppose the first question is whether you want to find out about something in particular, or whether you want to find out about stuff in a very general, broad sort of way.
So let's say in a general, broad way, to have a good understanding of magic history and how we got to where we are.
So some of the books are a little old. Things like The Illustrated History of Magic by Milbourne Christopher, or The Great Illusionists by Eddie Dawes, but both of them are great. So that'd be a good place to get just a big, broad overview. If you wanted something which is a bit more niche, it sort of dips in and out of areas rather than giving you this big general overview, any of Jim Steinmeier's books would be absolutely excellent. And all of them are very good because they go into enough depth in a particular area that you go, right, now I know something that's really interesting, even if it is just about a fairly small area of magic.
I see.
If you get more interested, then something like Bill Kalush's Ask Alexander database is incredible. I can't remember how many, but I think it's over 1 million, possibly even over 2 million pages of fully scanned, fully searchable magic periodicals and so on, and they go way, way back. So that's a great resource if you go, you know what, I'm really interested in this and I want to be able to go double lift and read thousands of different versions of double lifts and different thoughts on double lifts and so on. Then something like Bill's database is a really, really good way to go.
Who are some of your favourite magicians? We're going to do this in 2 parts. Let's say dead ones first, shall we?
Yeah. I like the dead guys more than the living ones.
You like
frankly.
the dead ones?
Yes. They're more interesting and you can't be disillusioned with them when you meet them. I like Hoffman very much because I've spent 5 years studying him. It would be a little bit weird if I didn't. Although I do think if I ever met him, he'd probably think I was some sort of serial killer stalker. So I know a little bit too much about him, perhaps. So I'd love to know more about him. Charlier, I think, is incredibly interesting because everything that we know about him says that he was an excellent magician. Possibly one of the early people doing what we would now think of as mental magic with cards.
Oh, right.
You know, that sort of mentalism, hands-offy, card tricky kind of stuff. That would be lovely to find out more about. I'd love to meet the guy who wrote The Notebook. I don't know who he is, but if I could find him somehow and then meet him and know who he was, that would be a big thing that I'd be very pleased about. And then there are all of the people you'd expect, like Hofzinser and so on, who, you know, it would just be lovely to meet them. The one thing which I'd say as a slight caveat to all of that is there are all the people like Devant a little bit, because there's a little footage of him, but Ed Marlowe and Di Vernon and so on, who I would love to meet. It would be absolutely wonderful to meet them and find out their thoughts about things and talk with them and see them do magic. But I wouldn't choose them because there is video available for them. So if you have to choose someone, let's say I've got 3, I'm not going to use one of my choices up on someone like Vernon, who I can get at least an idea of by seeing him on film, when I could see someone like Charlier, who I know nothing about whatsoever and there's barely even an image of him. So I would much rather use the choices on people a little further back who you don't have the good film or written records for.
What about magicians who are alive today? Are there any sort of modern performers, young or old, that you really enjoy watching or you're intrigued by their work?
Gordon Bruce is absolutely fantastic, Scottish magician. Really, really, really good card magician, a scarily good card magician, and also fantastically knowledgeable about the history of magic. And on top of all of that, sort of the perfect person to meet in a pub type environment. You can imagine him going to any pub in the world and instantly being the most interesting person with the most interesting anecdotes and being the most fun to sit around.
Right.
So he's very good on lots of different levels. Richard McDougall, I think, is absolutely wonderful. And in a slightly similar way, Jan Frisch. Because both of them, Richard with his cigarette act, say, you see a man sitting down who wants to have a cigarette, he tries to have a cigarette, he never quite manages it in a very, very interesting, magical way, and then the thing finishes. Or Jan Frisch, you see a guy who's trying to have a glass of water, lots of stuff happens with red balls, and at the end he's thrown water on his face, still hasn't had his glass of water. I think those are very interesting structures, because they're not things where you say, I'm seeing a start, a middle, and an end. You're just seeing a middle, and presumably there was lots of stuff before the cigarette happened, or before Jan wanted his glass of water, and there's lots of stuff after Richard decides actually he's not going to get that cigarette, so he's going to do something else, or after Jan goes, now I'm soaked, I don't want the glass of water anymore, I want something else. And I really like that idea that you're seeing a window into somebody's world rather than seeing a complete section of their world. So I think that's very interesting.
You look a bit like Jan Frisch, especially with the beard. Do you not think?
I think he's got longer hair than me.
That's true, he does a little bit. What about tricks? Let's talk about tricks. Your favourite trick?
So I think with favourite tricks, it's probably the thing that's being worked on at the moment in terms of stuff I'm doing, because that's the most interesting thing, that's the thing which has got the room for development and all that sort of stuff. So at the moment, for me, that would be the 2-deck coincidence trick that I mentioned from the competition, because I'm learning more and more about the timing of it and thinking more and more about the way to display the cards at the end and build the rhythm through it and so on and so forth. That's very exciting, and also thinking more about how to give this shuffled feeling to the pack earlier on, which is very exciting. So one of the big things that was a huge benefit from the competition I was thrilled with is I spent some time with Rich McDougall working on it, and he was able to point out an extra beat into the revelation of the cards. So before I had sort of 3 stages to dealing through cards, now I have 4 stages to dealing through cards, and that was sort of the exciting thing that made that week worth having as a week, which is a little sad but also quite positive at the time. In terms of watching other people, I don't get tired of Rich's cigarette acts. I don't get tired of Jan doing his act with the balls and the mug and the jug. I don't think I would get tired of watching Yu Ho Jin doing his manip stuff, although I haven't seen it for a little while, so maybe I would have done by now. I don't think so though. But I don't think there's a particular thing where I go, you know what, this is the trick that I like seeing.
Yeah.
More people or an attitude or...
Yeah, I understand. And just something that's of extraordinary high quality as well, which is...
Yeah, you want to see something that's good and that's different,
Yeah.
I think. The thing that made Yu Ho Jin so interesting is it looks like you've got 100 years of people doing manip acts based on back palms, and then he's gone, alright, the basic effect is I'm making cards appear, and I'm going to ignore all the bit that says you do that using a back palm and say, how am I going to make cards appear? And that's a fantastically exciting thing to see. In a way that somebody who'd gone, right, I'm going to learn how to back palm cards, do a manip act, whatever they develop isn't going to be as exciting, because they're sort of starting from that same point everyone else is, where you're going, it's about back palming, not just about making cards appear.
Well, this has been great fun. Thank you so much. Congratulations again. Magic Circle 2015 Close-Up Magician of the Year. Will Houstoun, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Great stuff. willhoustoun.co.uk is the website you need to go and have a look at right now. Both of Will's books, which he has written, are available on that website for immediate purchase. There's also a DVD set, which we didn't get round to discussing, which Will has had produced, which explains loads of incredible coin and card magic, which has to be seen to be believed. So go and have a look at it right now. Will is also available to lecture at your local magic club. Get in touch with him to book it in as soon as possible. He's going to be a very busy man after picking up the title of 2015 Magic Circle Close-Up Magician of the Year. Thanks very much for tuning in. There will be another new episode next Friday. I will see you then. Have a good week. Take care.